Welcome to the PI Podcast, Political Insights for the Palaging Inis. I'm your host, Matt Ordonez, and we are at another episode featuring candidates from the 2025 midterm elections. All right. And we've had a few episodes so far already with the ACT Teachers Parties. Now we have another party list. A bit different, related but different party list from a very, let's just say, historic party list with a long history. And of course, with a candidate, one of the party list candidates that personally I find very intriguing and interesting. God knows we don't agree on everything, but there's a mutual respect, and I'm excited for you to meet him. We've talked a few times, and yeah, he's definitely he has interesting stories for us tonight, as a longtime activist and now candidate of Bayan Muna Partylist. Please welcome Lean Porquia. Hello, Lean. Welcome to the PI Podcast.
Hey, Matt. Good day, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and let's talk about Bayan Muna and landscape that we
Mhm.
are venturing into 2025.
Okay, great. Actually, ironically, your part list is Bayan Muna, but I want to start with you first, before
Okay.
like Bayan
All
Muna,
right.
ikaw muna. No, but sino ba si Lian Porquia? Kasi like even before Bayan Muna, you've been always very active, and very done a lot actually as an activist on a lot of issues, let's say labor issues, nationalist issues. But can you tell the guests, introduce yourself, like who is Lian Porquia as a political actor, and how did you get into becoming a party list candidate? Go.
Sure. So I'm Lian. I'm actually with the labor movement
Mm-hmm.
before joining Bayan Muna. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I was the founding chairperson or founding national president, of the
Mm.
BPO Industry Employees Network, or BIEN
Mm-hmm.
Philippines. This is a labor association duly recognized by the Department of Labor
Mm-hmm.
for the BPO sector. So
Mm-hmm.
we represent the 1.7 million BPO workers
Mm.
in any mediation or any tripartite bodies that is involving the BPO sector. So basically, that's BN. We founded this organization in 2013. We are now 12 years, and since then, we've
Mm-hmm.
grown to thousands of members nationwide.
Wow.
So I was the founding president of BN, and that's when I started my advocacy
Yeah.
and activism in the labor movement. Prior to
Mm-hmm.
the labor movement, I was actually the youngest
Mm.
spokesperson
Mm-hmm.
of Bagong Alyansa Makabayan, or Bayan, in 2010 to 2013. But this was the regional chapter of the nationwide formation of Bayan. It was in Panay. So I was the spokesperson for Bayan in Panay Island.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that,
Yeah.
my activism actually started when I was in college. No, sorry, let me retract that. It's not actually in college, but it's actually earlier than college.
Okay.
But it was really formalized when I was in college. So I was the regional chairperson of the League of Filipino Students,
Mm.
LFS,
Mm-hmm.
in Western Visayas. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I was the regional coordinator of Kabataan as well. So you'll notice that my
Mm.
formation in activism really it's very extensive since college. I mentioned earlier that my activism really started back in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was in high school when I was invited to join a cultural group. Our group, we call ourselves. I know it's a little bit funny and
Yeah.
uh, very obvious. The name is Junior Red Guards.
Red card.
The
What's a red
Red
card?
Guards.
Because red card in sports is like foul, diba?
No, no,
But why a
no.
red card?
Red
Yeah.
Red Guards.
Red
The
guard. Okay. G.
Red Guards. Yeah,
Okay.
Red
Nice.
Guards.
Okay.
The Red Guards of Mao of the.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we call ourselves the Junior Red Guards. It's a
Mm-hmm.
cultural group. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so if you're asking me when my activism really started, that was in high school, and then
Mm-hmm.
like what I said, the formation really grew when I was in college, joining the League of Filipino Students,
Yeah.
Kabataan, and then later on becoming the spokesperson of Bayan, and then
Mm-hmm.
Bien, and then they actually had a stint, by the way, Matt, with KMU,
Mm.
with Sampaio Uno, as their
Mm-hmm.
public desk
Yeah.
officer for a time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, that's a long history, and you mentioned a lot of very familiar names. Kilosang Mayo Uno, League of Filipino Students. These are, you could see a lot of these in the history books, and these are very leftist. Some people would say far left, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you're definitely firmly planted in the left of the ideological spectrum. So maybe I want to know, maybe you mentioned, of course, even joining a group with Maoist
Yeah.
inclinations, beliefs. So maybe like why this side of the ideological
Mm.
spectrum, and what particularly motivated you to say this and not just say liberalism or conservatism or even other forms of Marxism? Like why this part of the spectrum?
You know what? The funny thing about that, Matt, is there was bias to that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because I was first introduced to the left
Yeah.
ideology as early
Mm-hmm.
as when I was still in high school. That's
Yeah.
why there's already that bias
Mm.
towards that ideology. But in
Mm-hmm.
terms of exposing to other ideologies,
Mm-hmm.
to conservatism, to
Yeah.
rightist thought, democratic centralism, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I learned a lot about it when I was already in college, when I took
Mm-hmm.
up political science. And there's that notion that when
Mm-hmm.
you are a political science in UP, automatically you are a leftist. I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to reject that idea because it's
Okay.
actually the contrary. Political
Mm.
science, as a study in UP, is
Mm.
more centrist than
Mm.
leftist, I would say.
I see.
It's probably because of the influence of professors, or the approach, the way
Mm-hmm.
the department would teach political science as a subject or as a
Mm-hmm.
discipline. It's really far from the idea that it's left. So
Mm.
I was exposed and introduced to conservative ideas. To the first time I read Ayn Rand, for example, was already in
Mm.
college, and that was a book recommended by one political science professor. So the idea of capitalism, the idea of the
Mm.
contradictions of socialism, things
Yeah.
like that, they all introduced in college. But
Yeah.
like what I said, probably because of that bias I have toward the left, it was easier for me to really identify how I would put myself between the left, the center, and the right.
Yeah. Where did that bias come from? Like, was it from like your personal life, or do you just read a book and it's like, Marxism or Maoism? Yeah.
Um, it's both theoretical and practical, I would say,
Okay.
Matt, because
Mm.
theoretical, of course, well, not to add to that bias, probably it's
Mm-hmm.
because the influence of my parents as well. Both my parents were activists during martial
Mm.
law.
Okay.
Obviously, they had influenced in my development years. As a kid or as a child, I'm exposed to different terminologies that may not be familiar to kids. Like, for example, talking about socialism in front of the dinner table, that's not
Yeah.
normal, right? So
Okay.
that's probably one of the biases.
Mm-hmm.
On a more practical side, I would consider my exposure to the realities as early
Mm-hmm.
as, I don't know, high school, how farmers are being abused
Mm-hmm.
by state forces, military forces. I
Mm-hmm.
witnessed firsthand
Mm.
how an open poor community would struggle and fight for
Mm.
their homes because they're being
Yeah.
demolished. And I've seen how communities demand for
Mm.
better living conditions, higher wages,
Mm.
because the economic conditions are no longer accommodating to their circumstances. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the practical biases that I've witnessed that
Yeah.
probably solidified my ideology, or not really ideology, but my principles, where I stand in the political
Sure.
spectrum.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. You're definitely like you inherited a lot of your politics from your parents. That's you're raised as one. That's interesting. And also witnessing, the people being oppressed, and people being marginalized. Yeah, I mean, these are fair positions to have. But I think it is a good opportunity to at least maybe comment. A lot of the organizations that you mentioned, let's just say, have a bad rap. Yung parang ayaw ng mga Pilipino dito. And maybe you could, and a lot of the times it's their quote unquote relation with the New People's Army. Now, maybe we'll get more into that later. But for now, why do you think leftists have a bad rap? And can you maybe remark on why that, like maybe assuage to our listeners who may hold that bad rap in their head?
Yeah.
What do our listeners need to know?
So I guess it really depends on whose perspective it's coming from. Let's remember that in the battle or in the war of ideologies, there's always
Mm,
propaganda,
mm,
and whoever wins propaganda wins the perspective of the prevailing status quo, for example.
Yeah.
So I'd like to put a context that the bad rep from the left,
Yeah.
it's because change in a radical form too hard for most Filipinos to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I say that? Probably because the radical change that we've been through. Remember, this
Mm-hmm.
generation that we are on right now,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a significant generation. There's a significant number in this generation that have experienced
Mm-hmm.
martial law, and
Yeah.
that population is
Mm.
growing old.
Mm-hmm.
So from a sociological perspective, I would say that that population, even though there's still a significant number of them,
Mm.
has not transcended the stories, the
Mm.
anecdotes, the
Mm.
realities that happened in martial law
Mm-hmm.
that currently has transformed
Mm-hmm.
into a different perspective that martial law is good rather
Mm.
than bad, and
Yeah.
how the current generation
Mm.
accepted that kind of notion or that kind of reality stories and things like that has
Mm-hmm.
affected the way they see
Mm-hmm.
change happen in the current conditions.
Uh-huh.
So what do I
Yeah.
mean? Back then, when we're talking about martial law, people are saying, "Oh no, martial law is good because things like that," and that story has transcended to the current generation. But the
Mm-hmm.
story, the other story, which is there are killings, there are
Mm.
people abducted, there are
Right.
genuine need to
Yeah.
change the rotten political economic system at
Okay.
that time did
Mm-hmm.
not transcend fully to the current
Mm.
generation. So I'm looking at that as one factor.
Mm-hmm.
Bad rap, quote unquote, is
Mm-hmm.
coming from the notion that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of perspective that has changed
Mm.
since martial law.
Okay. But also, I understand that. I definitely believe that, a lot of the beliefs and stories, anecdotes of people being comfortable in martial law being inherited to the next generation, and of course, that leftist groups were very much demonized, by the regime. So that was left over. But also, maybe you can also remark a little bit on this, and maybe you can tell us more about your experience on this. When people think of the word leftist, besides
Mhm.
the NPA, there are most of them that a legitimate exercise is about demonstrations, protests, rallies on the streets, which again,
Yeah,
people experience all the time. At kadalasan, dahil dyan, nagda-traffic, di ba? So I don't know, maybe you can tell us more, like, how was your experience?
sure.
Were you a part of this part of the left? Yeah, the placards and every chants and everything? Yeah. And
Yeah, not just being part of it, I probably have led some of it.
okay,
uh,
wow. Yeah. Any stories
um,
about that? Yeah.
I guess it really depends on the. To be honest about it, there are protest actions that may seem overboard. I would say.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that, I would think that it's probably in the wrong time, the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
While it is a fact, considering,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the social effects like traffic,
Mm-hmm.
the noise pollution, things like that. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, remember that the objective of having such protests is really to convey inconvenience directly to the state. Because
Mm-hmm.
remember, when there's traffic, of course, people will clamor that there's traffic, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily targeted towards the protest, but it's
Mm.
targeted towards the failure of the system to
Mm.
address the traffic, which is
Yeah.
caused by the protest, things like
Yeah.
that. So state cannot address the issues in the protest. It's being transmitted in other forms, which is
Mm.
social inconveniences like traffic, like noise
Mm.
pollution, like things like
Mm.
that. But remember, the protest actions, the concept of rally, the concept of protesting, the concept of, sige, i-block natin yung EDSA, punta tayo sa Commonwealth, doon tayo sa Menjola. These are
Mm.
not new concepts. These are contemporary actions. No?
It's an expression of
Remember,
democracy. Yeah.
even before pre-democracy, if
Okay.
you remember when we won the quote unquote independence from the Spanish colonizers,
Yeah. Okay.
early as 1902, 1903,
Mm-hmm.
1904,
Mm.
workers have already organized different forms of protests. And
Mm-hmm.
as early as that era, when workers would protest, their number would go as high as 10,000, twenty
Mm.
thousand
Wow.
time. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
in the history of the labor movement, the
Mm-hmm.
Unión Obrero Democrática,
Mm-hmm.
which later on became the offshoot of KMU, and then
Yeah.
later on of FFW and all other labor centers in the Philippines. Pag mag-organize sila ng rally in 1903, 1904, on the issue not even on wage, but
Uh,
on working hours, that was
mm-hmm.
the before, abutin sila ng 50,000 across Metro
Wow.
Manila.
This is
So,
1904, you say, like in the American
yeah,
wow.
American occupation. So
Occupation.
it's
Okay.
pre-democracy in the Philippines,
Mm,
pre-1945 democracy.
mm. Well,
So
pre-independence. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, let me. Okay, but I do want to ask though. Like, of course, you claim that these big demonstrations are expressions of frustrations over the system. Valid. I do want to ask maybe for our listeners, what has the, let's say, demonstrations accomplished, and that they should appreciate because of these demonstrations? What have these demonstrations given us?
Well, just to highlight a few, Matt, we've ousted two presidents
Okay,
in our
EDSA.
country.
Yeah.
Although others can debate whether the ouster was good or bad, it's a different
Mm-hmm.
thing. But the
Okay.
protest action itself ousted them.
Okay.
That's already a significant, output of those protest actions. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Second, more recently, the PUV phase out
Okay.
issue,
Mm.
which drivers and the transport sector have constantly protested since
Okay.
as early as 2020. Some of their actions are punitive, protest
Mm-hmm.
actions are punitive. Minsan
Mm-hmm.
nga, katatlong driver nga lang yan sa Philcoa mag-protest dyan. While there are big mobilizations against the PUV phase out, the output now is that the Department of Transportation under Secretary Vince Dizon has already expressed to suspend the
Mm.
implementation of the PUV phase out.
Okay.
So
Wow.
from
Mm-hmm.
2022 to 2025, we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at 3 years. There's no policy framework here. No, we're
Mm.
not talking about concepts. We're not talking about policy. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about protest actions, mass actions, mobilizations of
Mm.
led by the transport sector, by the drivers themselves, supported
Mm-hmm.
by different multi-sectoral groups that eventually
Mm-hmm.
led to the suspension, now to the suspension of the PUV phase out.
Mm.
So we're looking at from big things, ousting
Mm-hmm.
presidents,
Yeah.
to policy change, which is the
Yes.
PUV. And just to highlight another aspect of it, the we recall in 2017, 2018,
Mm-hmm.
the Pandi occupation of
Mm.
urban poor groups.
Yeah.
They were able to sequester houses, government housing for the
Mm.
military, the police
Mm-hmm.
that were left unattended for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just 100 families. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
thousands of urban poor families that marched all the way from Metro Manila to Pandi,
Mm-hmm.
Bulacan,
Mm-hmm.
and sequester the housing
Uh-huh.
community there left unattended
Mm-hmm.
by the government. So
Mm-hmm.
thinking and talking about what actions or what the outcome of
Mm-hmm.
these actions, it doesn't necessarily be that it's always populist, no?
Mm-hmm.
Kasi pwede siyang sectoral eh. Pwede siyang
Mm-hmm.
specific sectors, pwede siyang specific groups.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also be for the entire people,
Mm-hmm.
from the ouster of a president to a sectoral issue, which is
Mm-hmm.
housing or to
Yeah.
transportation. These
Mm-hmm.
are some of the outputs
Okay.
ng mobilizations or mass
Yeah.
actions.
I love that answer. And people actually forget that a lot of the things that we enjoy are because of demonstrations. Yeah. I do want to maybe, I mean, I love this part, but let's move on really to how you got into Bayan Muna. What is Bayan Muna? Kahit inuna natin, inuna tayo yung sa'yo,
Yeah,
but Bayan Muna. What is it?
sure.
And what's its history as a party list? Because I remember even as Bayan Muna, like when I read about the party system, Bayan Muna is usually one of the top like party lists, like the OG original gangster party list. So can you talk about that and how you got in?
Sure. So Bayan Muna, it was founded in 1999.
Mm,
So technically, we just celebrated our 25th year, and our first run in the party list election was in 2001, and we ranked
mm,
first. Surprisingly,
yeah.
we the party list at that time was not expecting that they're going to ranked first. In fact,
Mm.
they were prepared to lose because remember it was post ERA, ouster of ERA 2001. There were so many political actors at that time,
Mhm.
and the very strong, the formidable alliance was that of Gloria Arroyo, the vote for the champ. I forgot that, the Lakas Laban alliance, and at that time, the party list was not so popular among the
Mhm.
voters. In fact, political parties like Laban themselves and LDP,
Mm.
Laban Demokratikong Pilipino,
Mm.
were all running for party list. So
Mhm.
they were the top contenders at that time. There was even
Yeah.
one government program, if you recall, MAD, the Mamay na Ayos sa Droga of Richard Gomez. By number of votes, they were actually the number one party list in
Mm.
2001. But because
Yeah.
they were disqualified, because again, the Supreme Court said that it's a government program, it cannot run for party list. It was disqualified. That's why Bayan Muna became number one. So we got
Mm.
3 seats in
Mhm.
2001. We got 3 seats again in 2004.
Mm.
We got 2 seats in 2007. 2010, we only have 1 seat, if I'm not mistaken.
Y-
2013,
Uh-huh.
1 seat. 2016, 2 seats. And then 2019, we got 3 seats. Throughout our history, our track record, you'll notice that Bayan Muna has always been on the top of the party list
Mhm.
election.
Yeah.
2022, however, is a different story
Mm.
because from 1.2 million votes in 2019, we went down to 200 around 238,000 votes
Mhm.
only in
Mhm.
2022. We fell short by, actually, we ranked 63rd
Mm.
uh, in the
Ouch.
2022 party list
Yeah.
election. So we lost in 2022.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to let me just highlight a few things. In the party list system, 3 seats is maximum, correct? Like no matter
Correct.
how many votes you have, you get 3 seats. And Bayan Muna did that. You're among the top. First of all, maybe
Yeah.
explain like why or how did Bayan Muna get these great, let me just say, and groundbreaking performance as a party's group. And then why did it suddenly decrease, 2022, So can you start with like, first of all, in the beginning?
Remember, Matt, political history from post-martial law, which is the Cory period, until the
Mm,
Ramos era, or even the
mm,
ERAP era
yeah.
regime, Bayan, not Bayan Muna, but Bayan, the Bagong
Mm,
Alyansa Makabayan,
okay.
siya yung laging nagrarally. Siya yung nakikita
Mm,
lagi. Diba?
mm,
Pag may issue, nakikita kagad si Bayan.
mm-hmm.
And there were criticisms with the left that
Yeah.
bakit hindi na lang kayo sumali sa election? Eh, ang gagaling nyo pala eh. Bakit hindi na lang kayo sumali sa election?
Okay.
That criticism was raised as early as post-martial law, 1986, when Cory won.
Mm,
Because remember, if we're going to go back in the political history,
mm,
may story behind pa yan eh, sa history ng left. Diba?
mm,
There was a faction in the left that wanted to participate in the elections. There's a faction in the left that no, we should continue at the time the call for armed struggle, diba? The
mm,
revolutionary whatever.
mm-hmm.
So 1986 was a determining year for
Yeah.
the left. And when I say the left, the entire left movement, whether they're going to go the parliamentary route or they're going to continue with the armed struggle route exclusively, no?
Yeah.
But the different factions later on realized, pwede naman palang pareho. So may mga ganong
Mm,
notions.
mm-hmm.
So, Partido ng Bayan,
Mm-hmm.
no? It was the predecessor of the Bayan Muna, the Makabayan
Yeah.
that we have now.
Mm-hmm.
Partido ng Bayan in 1987 fielded 7 candidates, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
were Crispin Beltran, the late beauty queen Nelia Sancho,
Mm,
uh, and originally they were supposed to be aligned with
yeah.
the Tanyada Jokno group, which were all members of Bayan. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
the chairperson of Bayan was
Mm,
Tanyada.
yeah.
And yun nga, that because of that faction, things like that, the
Huh.
Tanyada group went with Cory while the other groups created the Partido ng Bayan. So fast forward, 2001, the party list system was new, enacted in its first election was 1998. Doon nakita ng mga tao na, okay, sige, bago tong Bayan Muna. Very, very fresh. That even
Mm-hmm.
politicians are seeking the endorsement of Bayan Muna.
Mm, okay.
LGUs, local politicians are seeking the endorsement from Bayan Muna. The Bayan Muna party list endorsed, let's say, this mayoral candidate, they would most likely get the votes of the local voters.
Mm.
So may
Mm.
ganong prestige na na-establish ang Bayan Muna. That's why 2001, 2004, and even 2007,
Mm.
always nasa top 3, top 4,
Mhm.
top 5 ang Bayan Muna. It's a different story, however, in 2013 when the Supreme Court changed the dynamics, no, of the
Mm.
party list law. Na
Yeah.
dati kasi, once you get 2% of the total votes, automatically you get one seat. If you
Mhm.
get 4%, you get two seats. If you get 6%, you get three seats. In
Mm.
2013, bago yan. So there's the
Mm.
formula. Once you get 2%, you get one seat. But under the law kasi, the party list needs to fill the number of seats allocated in Congress for
Mm.
the party list groups.
Mhm.
So right now, the total number of seats allocated for the party list is 61. So kailangan ganun karami ng Congress people ang ma-elect for party list.
Mm.
So in 2013, that changed.
Mhm.
And that's one significant change. And second, the definition of
Mm.
the party list, when you say marginalized sector or
Yeah.
marginalized advocacy, was also changed by the Supreme Court. Dati
Mhm.
kasi, the expectation is you have to belong in the sector that you represent in the party list to
Mhm.
become a nominee or to run
Yeah.
in the party list. Binago
Mm.
ng Supreme Court, sabi nila, you don't necessarily need to belong in the sector
Mm.
as long as you're an advocate, then you can represent the sector.
Ah.
So that opened the floodgates of Trapos to participate in the party
And
list
celebrities.
elections. Exactly. So
This.
since 2013, there's that trend
Mm.
na pinasukan ng mga itong mga traditional politicians ang
Yeah.
party list. Kasi napakadali eh.
Yeah.
Again, you don't necessarily need the 2% anymore. Kailangan mo lang makasama dun sa top 60. Pag nasa top
Mhm.
60 ka na, kahit yung boto mo ay 100,000 lang, basta nasa top 60 ka, you
Mhm.
can you can get a seat in Congress.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so it drastically changed. Now,
Mhm.
what's the story behind 2019? Well, I think since for many years, Bayan Muna has already established its presence in Congress. Kaya
Yeah.
nga pag may issue, lagi Bayan Muna naririnig. A
Yeah.
lot of people right now, during this campaign, a lot of people still think that Bayan Muna is in Congress. Akala
Uh-huh.
nila nanalo kami in 2022.
Mhm.
When we go to the markets, when we go to
Mm.
the communities,
Yeah.
ang lagi sabi nila na, ay hindi na kailangan ng mga kampanya ng bayan mo na laging nananalo yan. Di ba? Panalo
Yeah.
ka pa. But in
Mm.
reality, we actually lost in 2022. So,
Yeah.
2019 is a different story. 2022 is also a different story. We
Mm.
lost in 2022. But of course, there are several factors why we lost
Mm.
in 2022.
Yeah.
One factor would be, syempre, naniniwala naman kami na dinaya talaga yung bayan muna. There's an operation actually to share under Makabayan, we have different party lists, right? So
Yeah.
we have Bayan Muna, we have Gabriela. Before, we also have Anak Pawis. Similar to Bayan Muna, Anak Pawis was also a very popular party list group. In fact, in 2004, three
Mm.
seats din sila. 2007,
Mm.
two seats din sila. Ibig sabihin, ganun ka-popular din yung Anak Pawis. But in 2019, we noticed na may special operations talaga to discredit
Yeah.
Anak Pawis. Of the
Mm.
many party lists under Makabayan, yung lagit-laging nare-red tag back then was Anak Pawis.
Yeah.
In 2019, around about 50-60% of the leaders ng Anak Pawis were either
Mm.
killed or charged with arbitrary cases.
Mhm.
That same operation, that same trend happened to Bayan Muna in
Yeah.
2022. So the leaders of Bayan Muna were killed, including my father,
Oh.
Jory Perdia, and then a lot of the Bayan Muna leaders were charged with arbitrary cases as well.
So it was like sheer violent, well, state violence, I guess, which is unfortunate. But thankfully,
It
it's
is.
still, yeah, there still survives the movement. Yeah. Considering that this specific, state targeted state violence, how has the Bayan Muna adjusted or like moved forward, if at all, like learned from specifically like anti-insurgency and red tagging, things like that, especially when probably these things are asked when you campaign,
Yeah.
with the voters. So how have
We
you
always.
responded to that? Yeah.
I'd like to be clear though, and it's good. It's a good thing that we're having this conversation because we want to make it clear that the moment that we join the
Yeah.
parliamentary process, the electoral process, it's already a manifestation that Bayan Muna is not engaged in any armed struggle
Okay.
or in any way supporting armed struggle. No,
Mm.
the fact that we are part of government once we sit in Congress makes it a fact that we want to advocate for change
Mm.
through reforms within the parliamentary system,
Mm.
because it would be too ironic, it would be oxymoronic for Bayan Muna to advocate and support armed struggle on one hand. So I think it's quite oxymoronic for Bayan Muna to be, on one hand, be part of the institution, the parliamentary institution in Congress,
Mm.
be part of government, while on the other hand, be part of a movement
Mm.
or be part of the armed struggle that wants to destroy the same institution. The moment that we join Congress is already a declaration that Bayan Muna is not part of the armed struggle.
Okay.
So that should be clear. That should be made clear. No.
Mm.
However, Matt, there's always, how do I say this? Not really a caveat, but probably a side note or
Mm.
probably something to think about, because
Yeah.
the recognition of armed struggle, the recognition that armed struggle exists, is one of the reasons why Bayan Muna advocates for genuine change. Let's remember, bakit ba may insurgency? Why is there an insurgency problem in the Philippines in the first place?
Mm.
And addressing the root causes of insurgency
Mm.
should bring
Mm.
meaningful reforms. Probably for the New People's Army, for the Communist Party of the Philippines, they would believe that the way for that change to happen is through the armed struggle.
Mhm.
For Bayan Muna, the manner or the way to make meaningful reforms or change is
Mm.
through the parliamentary struggle.
Mhm.
So you'll notice the parallelism. There's a
Mm.
parallel effort to change the system, but
Mm.
it differs. It's different in terms of manner and conduct.
Yeah.
So addressing the root cause of insurgency, which is poverty, which is
Yeah.
landlessness, which is
Mm.
unemployment,
Yeah.
those social ills, those social problems is being addressed. Like I said, if the New People's Army, the Communist Party of the Philippines believe that the only way
Mhm.
to address it is to radically change the system through armed
Mhm.
struggle, Bayan
Mhm.
Muna believes that, then let's discuss this in Congress by introducing radical
Yeah.
reforms in
Mm.
Congress. For
Mhm.
example, we're talking about agrarian reform. The root cause of the insurgency problem is the absence of agrarian reform, genuine agrarian reform. The New People's Army believe that the only way to implement the genuine agrarian reform is by taking away the land
Mm.
of landlords,
Mm.
through armed resistance,
Mhm.
arming the peasantry and the workers and things like that. Then what if we explore the possibility of addressing it by passing a law
Mhm.
in this institution, in this system,
You're
within
right.
this system, address genuine agrarian reform. That's why
Mhm.
Bayan Muna sponsored the genuine agrarian reform bill.
Okay.
But expectedly, that bill has been sitting in Congress since 2001. It's already
Oh.
2025. It has not been passed. It has not moved any inch of
Yeah.
progress.
Okay. Yeah, that's unfortunate, Of course, I think we all have guesses why, and it's a lot of it was probably the composition of Congress, like you said, with Trapos. But I do want to go back to, of course, Bayan Muna. And maybe first, maybe you can go back through the history. If you're going to choose, what are the most important legislations and achievements Bayan Muna is able to accomplish in its long history, as a prominent party list? And maybe this is a chance for you to talk about your current platforms in 2025. What are some of the laws that you plan to push as priority? Okay, so let's start first with what has Bayan Muna done, and accomplished. Yeah.
Sure. So I don't think 1 hour or the remaining few
Oh.
minutes we have is enough to go through all the list.
Okay.
But just want to highlight a few.
Yeah.
So there have been thousands of bills
Mm.
that Bayan Muna have principally sponsored. And when you say
Okay.
principally sponsored, that they are the principal authors.
Yeah.
Um, of the bill. Just to name a few, like what I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, the Genuine Agrarian
Mm-hmm.
Reform Bill. Well, there are a lot, including wage increases,
Yeah.
legislated wage increases, the Human Rights
Mm.
Defenders Bill, all the issues that most Filipinos experience.
Mm-hmm.
There's a counterpart bill that Bayan Muna has passed, whether it's for the environment, whether it's
Uh-huh.
for social issues, for the urban
Uh-huh.
poor, things like
Mm.
that. I'm not going to go through the list. Now, for the bills that have been passed into law,
Yeah.
there's a quite number as well. For example, when Nery Colmenares was still the representative by Muna, he authored the free disaster text messaging in the Philippines,
Mm. That
which
was
a lot of
you, Bayan Muna.
yeah.
The one we
So
receive in our phones.
if
Yeah.
there's a typhoon, if there's an
Uh-huh.
earthquake, the free
Ah.
disaster text message
Okay.
we're receiving, it's mandated
Mm.
by law
Mm.
because of the Bayan Muna bill.
Okay.
A little bit of trivia there, Matt. When it was being deliberated in Congress, all the telcos raised their objection
Mm.
to this bill because what they wanted is they want to charge at 1 peso for every text message that they're sending out. But
Oh.
Eric Colmenares asserted in Congress that it should
Uh.
be free,
Mm.
that disasters like typhoons and earthquakes should be an exemption for
Mm-hmm.
telcos to send free text alerts. So it was passed. We are now getting free text messages.
Mm.
Funny thing is, there
Mm.
are politicians who are abusing this law
Okay.
because they're using it for their campaign or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
technically, that's one of the laws.
Yeah.
Another, the pension increase. This was
Mm.
also the 1,000 pension
Yeah.
increase for senior citizens. Bayan
Mm-hmm.
Muna principally sponsored that back
Mm.
in 2013. So if we're just going to talk about the number of bills and laws that
Mm-hmm.
the laws have been passed by Bayan Muna, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think again that the remaining few minutes would be enough.
Okay.
No, but there's
Yeah.
a lot. I want to focus now on what we want to happen or what we want to introduce this
Okay.
2025 or the
Mm-hmm.
20th Congress if
Mm-hmm.
we get the chance to win again the party list race.
Yeah.
Well, number one, we have five main agenda in our
Okay.
platform. One, to bring down prices through different forms of laws and bills. For example, repealing the value-added tax on
Mm.
oil products. That's one. We want
Yep.
to bring down basically the prices of basic commodities.
Mm-hmm.
Second, we want to legislate nationwide wage increase. The
Mm-hmm.
last time Congress have passed a law to increase wages was in 1998.
Yeah.
So it's already 2025. It's been 27 years since a law was passed to increase the wages of workers. So
Yeah.
that's one. And the basis of the salary increase or the wage increase would be from government data, which is the living wage, the
Mm.
idea, the concept of a living wage. There have been several studies already
Yeah.
on the exact amount. What's clear though is that in terms of capacity, in terms of can the economy survive a significant wage increase, the answer
Mm.
would be yes. And we
Mm.
want to introduce that in Congress in 2025.
Mm.
So bring prices down. At the same time, we want to increase the wages. Third, so we want to pass the Human Rights Defenders Bill. It's
Mm.
been pending already in Congress. By the way, just to add, compensation for martial law victims was
Mm-hmm.
passed into law. It was Bayan Muna who proposed it. So
Yeah.
I think there were 10,000 identified individuals by the
Yeah.
Commission on Human Rights, the Batay ng Bayani Foundation,
Mm.
listed 10,000 individuals, and they all received remuneration from the government
Mm.
since they were considered as victims of
Mm-hmm.
martial law. And we want to apply that to the same principle under the Duterte regime, all the
Mm-hmm.
victims of red tagging,
Uh-huh.
extrajudicial killings, and things like that. So that's on the human rights side. And
Yeah.
then another one is on the envi
Environment.
advocacy.
Yeah.
Correct. We wanted to repeal, of course, the Mining Act of 1995 and introduce the People's Mining Bill. We
Mm-hmm.
recognize the importance of the mining industry, but
Uh-huh.
we want to put priority on the community instead of
Mm-hmm.
businesses,
Mm-hmm.
mining companies, in terms of making policies how to implement and enforce
Mm-hmm.
the mining processes. And
Yeah.
lastly, on the political side, we're going to introduce a bill to specifically ban political dynasties in the Philippines.
Big issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so those are the five priority agenda of Bayan Muna for 2025.
Okay. And those are very important bills, certainly, or agendas. I do want maybe to tell the audience, our listeners, like Bayan Muna has survived so much, and it's admirable that you're still pushing forward. But maybe you can tell us something more, like what is Bayan Muna doing for its 2025 campaign? How has it been?
Yeah.
Kamusta ang kampanya? What's it doing differently? How have you?
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, you're not the first to ask that question, Matt, because a lot of people
Uh-uh.
have been wondering what is Bayern Muna going to do now that is
Yeah,
different from before
yeah.
since we lost already in 2022.
Mm,
So one, definitely we had challenges
mm-hmm.
and difficulty in filling the vacuum
Mm,
that happened in 2022.
uh-huh.
Remember, we have a lot of leaders that were killed,
Mm,
charged with arbitrary cases, imprisoned.
mm-hmm.
Some were abducted, and until now we can't find them.
Yeah.
So we had to fill in the vacuum of leaders, organizers,
Mm,
campaign managers
uh-huh.
nationwide, and we're talking from Ilocos region, from the Batanes Islands down to the Tawi-Tawi group of islands, Sulu group of
Mm,
islands. So it was challenging, and with the network and allies of Bayan Muna,
mm,
of course, avoiding them, trying to preserve the safety and security of people supporting Bayan Muna,
mm,
because anyone associated with Bayan Muna can easily get red tagged
mm,
now. That's why one of our former representatives, Siegfried de Duro,
mm,
filed the case in the Supreme Court, and it was a landmark case, by the way, that the Supreme Court said red tagging, they defined red tagging, and that's now what we're using as the legal definition of red tagging.
mm,
It's a threat to life and liberty of a person.
mm,
So basically, what the Supreme Court is saying, when you red tag a person, you're threatening the life and liberty of that person.
mhm.
So that's a win for
Yeah.
us. Tagumpayan
Okay.
sa amin. And we want to highlight that, in this campaign, na
Mhm.
red tagging kills. And what we're doing is really going on the ground and
Mhm.
explaining to all the people that we encounter na mali yung red tagging and there's no
Mhm.
reason to be afraid.
Mm.
So our approach this 2025 elections, well, it's not really different from what we've been doing since 2001.
Mhm.
Kasi it's still tao sa tao, it's still groundwork, it's still community organizing, we're still doing chapter building. In fact, over the last few days, we've established, I think, around 25 chapters. Binalikan namin yung mga chapters namin, and
Mhm.
we've elected new officers for all of those chapters, etc., and things like that. So it's
Mhm.
the same approach, but this time it's guarding them na if this happens to you,
Mhm.
these are the safety nets that we can do. There are tools that they can use, and there
Mhm.
are resources that they can reach out to
Mhm.
whenever that the same attacks would happen in 2022.
Mhm.
In fact, we're seeing that now. I don't know if people have seen this on the news. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure
Mm.
na may mga posters na kinakalat na instead of bayan muna, nakalagay is bayad muna.
Uh-huh.
Actually, it goes to our favor, to be honest
Yeah.
about it. It's free publicity, regardless
Yeah.
of Bayad Muna, the
Mhm.
font, the design, the style, the color, it's exactly the same. At
Mhm.
first glance, people will think it's Bayan Muna. So
Mhm.
whether it's Bayan Muna or Bayad Muna, people will
Yeah.
see it as Bayan Muna. So it's actually free publicity for us. So,
Mhm.
but of course, again, it's still black propaganda. And
Mhm.
aside from that, we are now exploring the tools that Comelec have provided us. For example,
Mhm.
we appreciate the active reminders of Comelec na bawal yung red tagging. And because
Mhm.
of that, we're utilizing that memorandum na, oh, sabi ng Comelec, bawal to. And if you do that, if you red tag us, kakasuhan namin kayo. And we've
Mhm.
we've seen them do something about it. No? And
Mm.
we're happy about it. well, aside from that, the legal remedies like the Supreme Court, things like that, or the local courts, we
Mm.
want to utilize them as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think for 2025, there's an opportunity for us to reclaim our democratic space
Mm-hmm.
in this parliamentary struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Kasi at the end of the day, we don't want that the party list system, for the lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
bababuyin ng mga
Mm.
trapo ng mga landlord, ng mga
Mm-hmm.
malalaking negosyante, ng mga
Mm-hmm.
politiko, ng mga trapo, ng kung sino-sino siya na gagamitin lang talaga yung party list system for them
Mm-hmm.
to expand their political
Mm-hmm.
business. Imagine,
Mm.
ngayon sa party list system, dati kang congressman ng distrito, you have
Mm-hmm.
the district,
Mm.
but sa district you need 130,000,
Mm.
140,000 to win a seat in Congress. Sa
Mm.
party list, kahit 100,000 ka lang, as long pasok ka sa top 60, pwede na. So alam mo
Mm.
yon,
Mm.
kahit yung mga political dynasties, mga so-called political families, they're now exploring
Mm.
the party list elections as a way for
Yeah.
them to maintain power.
Mm. So what do you think what reforms do you think are needed to fix these party list anomalies, as you'd say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so laws need to be passed. That's why
Yeah.
one of our agenda is really to clearly define political dynasties so that
Yeah.
it will prevent political dynasties from lording, not just in the party list system, but even in the
Yeah.
Senate or even in other elected positions.
Yeah.
But on top of that, we have to clearly define as well what a marginalized sector or a
Mm.
marginalized group is in the
Mm.
party list system, and
Mm-hmm.
clearly define that
Yeah.
representation, genuine sectoral representation, should come
Yeah.
from the sector that that nominee or that candidate is coming from.
Yeah. How would you define a genuine marginalized sect?
That's a good question because a lot of people, a lot of candidates now are
Yeah.
claiming they are workers.
Yeah.
They are mahihirap sila, di ba?
Mm.
Yung may isa pa nga dyan dati, kandidato, sabi niya, lumangoy ka na ba sa dagat ng basura? Yung mga ganong
Mm-hmm.
klaseng
Mm-hmm.
propaganda. But when we talk about genuine sector representation, we look at ano ba yung history ng kandidatong to. Pag sinabi ba niyang manggagawa siya, does he really come from the working class or working
Yeah.
sector? Ibig sabihin nun, manggagawa ba talaga siya? Ano ba siya klaseng manggagawa? Construction worker? Konduktor ng
Mm-hmm.
bus? Ano ba siya klaseng
Mm-hmm.
manggagawa? Pag sinabi niya na may-ari siya ng construction company or
Mm.
isa siyang malaking contractor, I don't think na that would fit under the definition of a genuine sectoral representation. No?
Mm.
So that needs to be defined
Mm.
once we talk about what is the definition of a genuine sectoral representation.
Mm-hmm. I think this might have been skipped. No, like you talked a lot about Bayan Muna's long list of achievements, and its long history. But maybe you can make it clear. Maybe this could be the closing statement. Maybe you can tell the listeners, what does Bayan Muna represent? And maybe your best explanation. Why should people vote for Bayan Muna? Okay, so go.
Yeah. Yeah, thank
Go.
you for that, Matt. Yeah. So, yeah, I've been talking about a lot about Bayan Muna, but really, sino ba or ano ba talaga yung Bayan Muna? So, Bayan Muna sa party list, we started our party list as the marginalized representation of the poor sectors
Mm.
in society. When you say poor sector
Mm.
society, ito yung mga manggagawa, ito yung
Mm-hmm.
mga maratang tagalagsod, ito yung mga magsasaka, ito
Mm.
yung groups that belong to the 99%, kumbaga the 1% versus
Mm.
the 99%.
Mm.
That's how we define the sectoral representation of Bayan Muna.
Yeah.
Eventually, it was clearly defined even further na
Okay.
ang Bayan Muna ay sektor ng mga mahihirap.
Mm.
So, pag sinabi natin mga mahihirap, ito yung mga minimum wage earners or below
Mm.
minimum wage earners. Ito yung mga
Yeah.
walang sariling tirahan. Ito
Yeah.
yung mga walang trabaho. Ito yung mga walang access sa opportunity or social services. Pag sinabi
Yeah.
natin mahihirap, ito yung mga, kung according sa government definition, ito yung mga nakakaranas ng gutom. Ito yung mga
Mm-hmm.
walang sariling bahay. So,
Mm.
these are the sectors that Bayan Muna represent. So
Mhm.
when we look at the demographics now of Bayan Muna in terms of nominees and
Mhm.
leaders, of course, we still have the same leaders since 2001. Andyan sila sa Turo Campo. He is the
Mm.
national president of Bayan
Yeah.
Muna. Neri Colmenares is the former representative of Bayan Muna, is also our current first nominee. Siya rin yung
Mhm.
chairperson, sitting chairperson ng Bayan Muna.
Mhm.
And the top three nominees include, of course, Nery Colmenares, former Representative Caloy Zarate, and then also former Representative Ferdy Gaite.
Yeah.
Now, of the 10 nominees, Matt, just want to highlight this na sa limang nominado ng Bayan Muna,
Mm.
lima doon ay galing sa sektor ng manggagawa.
Mhm.
So there's five of us.
Yeah.
Ako masabi ko manggagawa ako kasi sa call center ako nagtatrabaho.
Okay.
Uh, we also have other from the government employee sector,
Yeah.
former Congressman Ferdy Gaite. We also have leaders from different unions. So we have Mags, Pangulong Mags Camoral, who's from Southern Tagalog.
Mhm.
She was a survivor of the Bloody Sunday massacre in
Mm.
2022. And we
Mm.
also have another labor leader from Central Luzon, Paul Villuya.
Mhm.
Paul was a political detainee for a very long time. He was charged with trump up charges
Mhm.
because of his union organizing. He
Mm.
was recently released from detention, from prison. Kahit,
Mm.
alam mo yon, hindi nga na napakita yung mga ebidensya sa kanya. That's why the court dismissed the case. Luckily, just in time before us nakapag-file ng certificate of nomination and acceptance sa COMELEC. So that's Kapol. And then we have another nominee from Western Visayas, si Tita Irma, who was a former NFA employee as well.
Mhm.
So you'll notice na 5 sa 10 nominado ng Bayan Moon ay galing talaga sa mga manggagawa. And then of course, we
Mhm.
have Nery Colmenares, Attorney Caloy, and also the current lawyer ng ICC victims, si Attorney
Mhm.
Christina Conti.
Mm.
She is also one of our nominees.
Okay.
So this is the composition of Bayan Muna. Genuinely, we want to represent poor, marginalized sectors of our society, and we
Mhm.
want to deliver and introduce the issues and address the issues of our sector, of this
Mhm.
very broad sector in
Yeah.
Congress.
Mhm.
That's why, yun nga, babalik ako dun sa lima na main platforms namin, ibaba ang presyo, itaas ang sahod, protektahan ng karapatan ng pantao, protektahan ng kalikasan,
Mhm.
at tigilan na or buwagin na ang mga political dynasties.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. Thank you for that pitch in that clarification. Of very hardworking, and hard hitting activists who are now in trying to run for office and make a difference. Take note though, you mentioned like how broad Bayan Muna's base and sector is, but when you also say it's marginalized, but take note, maybe you can highlight, marginalized does not necessarily mean minority kasi halos na lahat ng tao, kung tutuusin, ay manggagawa
Right,
ayon sa
exactly.
ano mo, di ba? So what is marginalized? Yeah. If it's not a minority, yung
Um,
konti, sa gilid, di ba? Okay.
Not necessarily. I think you're right, Matt.
Yeah.
It's important to really define what marginalized is. Kasi
Yeah.
by siguro yung payak niya na definition, yung
Mm.
minority over the majority.
Mhm.
Pero not necessarily nga na minority kasi pag sinabi marginalized, mas ano pa siya mas we want to define it as representation ba
Mm.
na do they have enough representation
Mhm.
based on their interest,
Mhm.
collective interest in terms of policy making, in terms
Mhm.
of access to social services, in terms of access to government, not just social service,
Mm.
but access to government. Kasi again, remember, milyon ang mga mahihirap sa Pilipinas. But
Mhm.
why do we consider them marginalized, even though they're not
Mm.
really that small in number? Because
Mm.
we look at the population in Congress, sino ba yung
Mhm.
mga nandun sa Kongreso? The
Mm.
1%. So
Mm.
the influence, the power, the
Mhm.
authority of control of the
Mhm.
1% supersedes the 99%.
Mhm.
I'm metaphorically speaking.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's how we want to define that
Right.
marginalization does not necessarily mean in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It can be because they don't have their interests are being marginalized
Mm-hmm.
by those who control or those who have control or power
Mm-hmm.
in Congress or policy making.
Okay. So that's a lot of people you'll be representing, a lot of people that need empowerment. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it could be disempowerment. That's a bit more clear than marginalized. But okay, that's another discussion that maybe we should have with all the parties in Comelec. But Leon, yeah, thank you for sharing us the rich history of your personal activism and the rich history of, the left and how Bayan Muna has been a part of that left, how much it has survived, and how it has continued to push for the rights of many Filipinos. Okay. Now, maybe before we fully wrap this up, can you tell our listeners if they're interested to know more about Bayan Muna, where can they find you? More information, how can they support you?
of course. So Bayan Muna, we are present in all social media platforms, in
Mm.
Facebook, in Twitter, in Instagram. We even have our TikTok account.
Mm.
If they have we actually get a lot of questions, concerns, queries, and even when tagging online, Matt. So
Okay.
they can message us. I think
Mm-hmm.
people already, we have a strong social media presence. They can
Mm-hmm.
easily reach out to us, just message us. We can accommodate as many, questions, concerns, or even those who want to join Bayan Muna. We also
Mm-hmm.
have chapters nationwide. So we are found mostly in different urban poor communities, in different
Mm-hmm.
peasant communities as well.
Mm.
So if you see someone wearing Bayan Muna, or if
Mm-hmm.
there's a flag of Bayan Muna, most likely there's local presence of our chapters in the
Okay.
area, so they can always reach out to us.
Okay. Thank you, Leon. We'll be, of course, putting the links of all their social media on the show notes. Although this is not explicitly an endorsement, this is a good chance to be educated and informed on the rich history of Bayan Muna and of the left, of which Bayan Muna is a part. And please be open-minded, even though you don't always agree. I enjoy this conversation, hearing the rich experience of people who risk their lives just to try and make lives of Filipinos better, and pushing for progressive laws that benefit us. Like something as simple as the text message warning for it to be free for all of us is, it's a small but significant help, for everyone. And if you want to feel like that, continue laws like that, please vote.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead and
Yeah. So yeah,
yeah,
do please vote for Bayan Muna. We are number 59 in the ballot.
59.
We are third from the left
Okay.
at the back. I have
Okay.
to I have to figure that out, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, for more information, feel free to reach out to any of our social media accounts, and
Mm-hmm.
our social media team would be happy to answer any of your queries. And of course, Matt, in behalf of Baimuna, we are grateful for inviting us to join your
Mm-hmm.
podcast,
Yeah.
Political Insights. I know that you've been doing this podcast for quite some time, and I know your followers, your listeners. I hope that this can give them a different insight, in terms of the political advocacies and
Mm.
what Baimun is about. Dami lang sinabi about retagging, mga
Mm.
NPA yan, etc., etc. But try to listen, try to get to know more about us, and try to understand the advocacy that we're fighting for. You'll realize and you'll understand that we just wanted a better Philippines. We want a better country for the Filipino people. And
Yes.
it may sound, it may sound cliche, or it may sound
Yeah.
magnanimous or
Mm-hmm.
self-patronizing, but at the end of the day, what we really just wanted is, a better nation for the Filipino people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Leanne. And don't forget, of course, research on all the party lists if you have a hard time choosing. But yeah, it's always important.
All right,
Vote. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Leanne. Good luck. Best of luck in the campaign. All right.
thank you, Matt,
Thank
and maraming salamat din po.
Okay. The PI podcast can be found on YouTube and Spotify and many other places where you get your podcasts. You may follow us on Facebook and send us a direct message, or you may email us at pipodcastph@gmail.com. But until the next episode, magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.